Well, with that said, I want to introduce my guest today, and this is his second time on the program. He writes a blog under the pseudonym, the pen name, John Galt. Now, if you've read Atlas Shrugged, you already know the identity of John Galt. He says we've passed the point of no return in the crisis that we're facing. He says it's too late to save your neighbor, too late to save your friend. It's too late to save a family member who will not listen. It is too late to plan for a world of freedom and individualism. Atlas is shrugging, yet nobody cares. The power of the people is now the rule of law. Sadly, the people who are in control are neither those of the founders or of God. Prepare accordingly. John, welcome back to True News.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Glad to have you on the program. John, I just want to have just a casual conversation here with you today on some of the amazing things that are going on in the world. I would say we have to, if we break this up into three major categories, we have an ongoing global financial crisis, which is really the true term ought to be a world monetary war, a world currency war being waged by central banks against other central banks. That's what's really going on. But the common term is the global financial crisis, and right now the crisis is really boiling in Greece. The second thing is Fukushima. The mainstream news media doesn't talk about it. The general public doesn't even remember Fukushima. They think that's old news, and if why would you be talking about Fukushima? Well, they don't realize that every single minute radiation is still pouring out of Fukushima into the air and into the Pacific Ocean. And then number three, the Middle East, and the real possibility that we are going to finally see that war in the Middle East this year. And I guess we could add a fourth category, and that would be the possibility of civil unrest in this nation centered around the November presidential election. So let's spin the wheel, and you tell me which category comes up on top. You want to start with?
Well, it's an amazing, thank you again for having me back, but I cannot believe the change since the last time we spoke and what's occurring in our world, whether it's Fukushima or the United States. I think I'll start by the most disturbing story, which tells me that God is turning his back on America, which ties into the civil unrest story. I get up early in the morning, for those of you. I'm a night owl, a morning owl, a day owl. I'm up and down all day long, working, etc. And I woke up at 4 o'clock the other morning and flipping through the television, watching the financial news, etc. And I saw the most shocking story, the story of aversive therapy being applied to special needs students at a school in Massachusetts. And I realized that America had passed a point of no return. When you start looking at the police state implementation, the demands by our government to have intrusions into your personal data and websites, the ability to and request to arm unmanned drones by police departments, not military units. When you start adding the list of things that are occurring, how this country is starting to degrade itself to an atheistic, Marxist-centered or authoritarian regime similar to that of East Germany, Russia, or, God forgive us for saying this, Nazi Germany, the future looks very dim up to and after this election, in my opinion. And I fear that God is going to turn his back on us as a result.
John, I think this is the sad conclusion that anybody must come to if you are truly looking at what is happening in the country. We had a meeting here about 6 weeks ago where I invited a number of watchmen here, Steve Quayle and Gary Call, a long list of prominent, distinguished watchmen who have bravely declared for years that America must turn around and go back or face great trouble. But the conclusion that we had in that meeting is the time of warning is over. It's just over. There's no point. You're wasting your time at this point to continue warning. We've crossed the line. The nation, as I said in the meeting, we're not on the edge of the cliff anymore. We went over the cliff. We're in free fall. And we're going to hear the splat very soon. At this point, John, the only thing you and I and our audience can do, the only thing you can do at this point is take immediate action for your own safety. That's it.
Amen. I mean, let's look at what's happened recently. You have the Catholic Church, the largest and oldest religious institution in the world, per se. I mean, it's a matter of opinion, a matter of interpretation, but as far as organized religion. And they're being directly attacked by the United States government. You have individual churches, small ministries, under attack, infiltrated, being spied on by its members. Who would have envisioned in the United States of America a program similar to that was implemented in East Germany in the 1950s, where individuals were recruited to spy on fellow members in a parish and report back to the government on their activities, their beliefs, and the words they use? Who could have envisioned a society where if a church is performing a function to sit there and help the members of the community is told to turn away from that church and to accept the government's aid because it's tainted because of the beliefs, be it Judaism, Christianity, the good Muslims, or some other religion. You see where I'm going with this?
That's right. Well, John, do you remember several months ago when a Catholic, was it an archbishop or it was a high-ranking Catholic priest, issued a letter to all of the Catholic chaplains in the U.S. military, and it was outlining the Catholic Church's opposition to the U.S. government forcing Catholic hospitals and organizations to violate their conscience regarding birth control, abortion, and things like that. And for the first time in history, the United States government, the Department of Defense, issued a written decree forbidding chaplains from reading a letter in chaplain services of U.S. soldiers. That has never happened in the history of this nation. We crossed the line now when Washington now tells pastors what they can and cannot say.
That's the truth. And the sad part about this, and this is the course, for those who are not aware, the course that we're on is one that has been followed by the Communist Party of Russia, of the behind the Iron Curtain, and currently in China, North Korea. I have a friend who's on missionary work in India. He is enduring extremely tough times. As you know from your missionary work, when you're in a country that is hostile to Christians and has other religions as the predominant religion, when you are assaulted, you are literally assaulted. He's had to endure and withhold protecting his flock in the method he would like to do so. When you see Christianity under assault worldwide, when you see it under assault on our shores, our founding fathers warned that this is a nation that is founded in God, founded in the church, founded on a moral center. When you abandon that, God turns his back. We're in the process of the final alienation, and that would lead us into the Middle East discussion quite nicely, if I might add.
Yes, okay. Let's go there.
Right now, there's an extreme amount of hostility between the American government and the Israeli government, as we both know, to the point now where I fear we're going to see a schism, literally, where they will isolate the Israeli government after Israel attacks Iran. It's an inevitability, in my opinion, that Israel will lead the attack. Now, Russia ideally wants the United States to lead the attack, so the Arab Street turns against America. But with the collapse of Syria and the threat of chemical weapons being fired onto Tel Aviv, Hebron, around the entire northern half of Israel, Israel is running out of time to react and implement a program to defend its citizens and to save its nation from utter destruction. And that's before one nuke has been tested by the Iranian government, which, according to some sources, has already occurred, as there were reports, unconfirmed to this date, that last year an Iranian nuke was tested by the North Koreans. The theory is the next one will also be of an Iranian design to be shared by both the North Koreans and Iran. That would be more of a trigger event for an Iranian-Israeli attack than anything else. Thus, Obama wants to save the idea of an attack for political convenience. He wants to avoid anything that would impede his reelection. And I know that sounds so sick and twisted, but when you look at his policies, at his belief systems, his moral center, which is very red in my opinion, you begin to understand the thought process. He is trying to use Israel to achieve his political goals. He has no interest in biblical implications, in faith, and what the American people believe, and the true friendship between the Jewish people and the American people. His ideals are to bring a global order onto the entire world society. And the lack of concern about the millions who had done the process is not his. He wishes to implement it as soon as possible, but on his schedule. The American people who are objecting to this are truly raising Cain about it, for lack of a better phrase, but their voices are being silenced. Have you noticed how we sit there and say something about the Middle East, either as individuals, as political groups, etc.? We are either belittled or told to silence because we're not experts. We're not part of Hillary's State Department. And that's a terrifying thought.
John, do you remember this didn't get a lot of play in January, maybe early February of 2009. Obama had just went into the White House. And I don't recall the news outlet that reported it. I want to say the Times of London, maybe the Telegraph. It was one of the London papers. But the story said that a high-ranking official in the Obama White House. Now, again, this was in the first several weeks of the Obama reign of terror, January, February 2009. This story said that a high-ranking Obama official told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, quote, "We are going to remake the world. Don't get in our way."
I remember that vividly. And I remember Netanyahu reportedly going home to his ministers. And people were saying, well, that means nothing until the last 60 days. Since we've talked, a new coalition has been formed in Israel with an opposition party. And it was a party that no one ever envisioned Netanyahu uniting with. Thus, they have such a majority in Israel, they can act if need be to save their nation and protect it. They can take the course of action to rebuff the United States and say, we don't wish your aid, we will do without you. Today, in the news as we record this, a shocking story crossed my wires where Israel has openly declared that they're going to seek closer military, economic, and diplomatic ties with communist China. Israel is picking the winners in the world.
Israel is making an alliance with China?
They are seeking a closer diplomatic, economic, and military ties with China. And that should be a screaming red flag for any American citizen who's paying attention. This is because they are so concerned about being betrayed by the United States, they do not trust the Obama administration, and they have sent the second in command of their military to China, and they have sat there and sent several high-ranking diplomats to China. I saw the story in the AP, and it says Israel steps up security ties with China. They are seeking everything that they can to have closer ties with China because they do not trust the Americans, in my opinion.
You know, and last Thursday I placed on TrueNews.com an Australian newspaper article where a high-ranking Chinese official told the Prime Minister of Australia, it's China or the USA, pick one. Australia, our ally, Australia, being told by China, you cannot have friendship and alliance with America and friendship and alliance with China. You have to choose one.
And that's what we've done by creating a new world order in Obama's perverse vision. We're forcing historic long-term allies. Australia has been an ally of the United States since Australia became a nation. And here we are turning our backs on New Zealand, Australia.
Well, look at what Obama's policies, look at the impact it has had on the Church of Jesus Christ in the Middle East. I mean, it was bad enough what Mr. Bush and Cheney did with the wars in Iraq. But since then, with this manipulated Arab Spring movement, with the uprisings in Egypt that spread, Tunisia and Libya and across the Middle East. I mean, all that was orchestrated. It was financed by George Soros and U.S. State Department covert operations, and Obama and Soros were behind all this. But the bottom line is that the turmoil it has brought to the Middle East has not only upset the geopolitical balance of power in the Middle East, but it has put hundreds of thousands of Christians in those Middle Eastern countries. It has put their lives in jeopardy. Thousands of them have fled their homes to escape the persecution. I mean, this is all the result of the Obama foreign policy.
Well, a prime example of what you're talking about in a key area of the world, in Syria, we're supplying weapons and funds to the quote-unquote fighters of that region. Unfortunately, most Americans accept it as, yay, we're supporting the freedom fighters, the typical naive view without knowing the full story. The monies are going to al-Qaeda forces. From Asian News IT today, they are talking about a story where the Christian vicar of Aleppo is warning that foreign forces do not want peace, and in fact that the forces are mercenaries, terrorist mercenaries from Tunisia, Libya, Turkey, Pakistan, and other radical Islamic states. And what are they doing? They're not fighting the government. They're hunting down the minorities, which means the Jews and the Christians. This policy has been ignored by the Bush and Obama administration in Iraq. The last Jew died in Afghanistan last year. The only Christians left in Afghanistan are our soldiers and those soldiers from NATO. When you start adding it up, we're basically, under the Obama administration, helping to mold and create the caliphate that the Saudi crown prince was unable to do for 50 years.
And the fact that leadership in the United States is allowing this evil, wicked man to do these things means that there will be consequences that will be felt in America, because the Bible says that, no man should be deceived, that whatever you sow, that shall you reap. So we're sowing tremendous seeds of social unrest and violence that is impacting once solid Christian communities throughout the Middle East, and they're being disrupted. They're fleeing. They're going from country to country. They're refugees escaping the sword of Islam. This is going to come here, John, because the Bible says you're going to reap what you sow.
It is here in my backyard, believe it or not, in Tampa, where Sharia law is being allowed to uphold a property dispute, because they said that Florida state and United States constitutional law does not apply in a religious dispute between two individuals of the same faith. Now, there are people like yourself and myself who hear this, and we fall out of our chairs, we pick ourselves up in total astonishment. This is going to go to the Florida Supreme Court within 2 years. There's been no challenge to it because the two parties involved have no reason to dispute the judge's ruling. But when you look at it from the outside, this is an imposition of Sharia law against the Constitution, against our society, against the belief system we established of one man, one vote, blind justice, whereas a mullah, instead of a jury of your peers, a religious figure is allowed to adjudicate cases, and if that power is expanded, which is their desire, all of us would be subjected to that law. God's not going to smile on us if we sit there and abandon Christ for a false prophet, in my opinion. And I know those are strong words to some people. I stand by it.
John, going back to Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, it appears that the division is so deep, the level of distrust that Mr. Netanyahu has for Barack Obama is so deep that it appears that he's made the decision that Israel will attack Iran this year before the U.S. November presidential election in order to pressure Obama to come in the war on the side of Israel. If this is true, then are we looking at a late fall war, or do you think Mr. Netanyahu will pull the trigger even earlier?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu's under some restrictions at this point in time. One is the weather. You have an increase in sandstorms in the Middle East, which really begin to pick up now through mid to late August. Sometimes they bleed into September. It depends on how active. We see hurricanes in Florida, for example. They get tropical cyclones. But the end result of that is the wind pushes up these huge sandstorms up through the Persian Gulf region, making it very difficult for aircraft to operate and impossible for cruise missiles to function properly. So there's a window here for both the Iranians to harden their positions and the Israelis to harden their positions. The Israelis openly announced 2 weeks ago in the Jerusalem Post that they're building redundant military outposts, hardened military outposts, to survive a strike from rockets and missiles and from its enemies, be it in Syria, Lebanon, or Iran. At the same time, Israel took delivery of its fourth diesel-powered silent submarine, which is capable of firing cruise missiles tipped with nuclear weapons. And also at the same time, Israel has been in a silent conflict with the nation of Turkey. So a lot of things are building from what we discussed last time on your program to what's occurring over the next 4 months. I think this is the time where everyone hardens their positions, prepares their militaries, and then the die will be cast probably in September or October. Or I wouldn't even be surprised if Netanyahu were to launch it on our election night so as not to appear to have altered the results of the election.
However, if he is trying to play his hand to force Obama to support Israel, he would have to do it several weeks before the election.
Or he may have in my opinion, he may have hardened his ties and secured enough ties with our enemies, China, etc., where they can sit there and say, we don't need the United States any longer. We wish to be an independent nation. We'll do it on our schedule. Think of the humiliation that Obama would receive from Israel hitting Iran the same time that Obama wins re-election. What would be the front page story? Obviously the war, not Obama's re-election. It would be a stick in his eye, so to speak. It's an interesting theory that I've come up with that that's a possibility. But like you said, if they feel they need the United States, they would hit probably the first or second week of October, thus destabilizing our election scenario and forcing Obama to take a stand one way or the other.
According to Debka File, that website says that Israeli war strategists fear that Iran may carry out a surprise first strike on Israel instead of Israel attacking Iran. You think this is in the realm of possibility that we're going to wake up one day and find out that Iran attacked Israel?
Absolutely. It is an absolute, in fact, to put the Israeli phrase on this is high probability event. If they fear that Israel will attack soon, whether the information is accurate or not, the Israelis consider it a high probability event that they would launch a first strike. Now, what that entails, for those of you who are not familiar with the Israeli defense systems, and I'm no military expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going off of everything from Israeli newspapers and defense sites that have written about this. they have the capability to shoot down somewhere between 400 to 800 incoming rockets and missiles. The Iranian theory of attack is to launch somewhere north of 2,000 to 3,000 from Lebanon, from Syria, from Iran, using every launcher they have, every rocket that they can get into the air, overwhelming the systems, using chemical weapons, using primitive, what they call dirty bombs, whatever they have to that they can put on the tip of the missile if they don't have a nuke ready, hitting the Israeli cities, decimating them so severely, understanding that they will be wiped off the map in retaliation. But by reducing Israel as a functioning state, they would be martyrs in the eyes of the Islamic world, and the Shia would have the dominant role in Middle Eastern politics for that period because they would be the heroes of the street. They eliminated the Jewish threat. This is a historic, long-term idea. First started with Nasser, with Assad's father. Many leaders have thought about it. Saddam Hussein wanted the nuclear capability to be the man to become the new head of the caliphate. Unfortunately, for the evil doers of the world, the United States was taking a principled stand. We had Israel's back. We allowed them to fight and defend themselves. In this current situation, even if Israel were to accept and absorb a first strike, I don't think the United States would back Israel if Israel were to take 12 or 15 cities off the map in Iran and take out Damascus and other cities in the region.
Well, as you mentioned Damascus, Syria, I was getting ready to bring this up. I was looking at Isaiah 17. Behold, Damascus will cease from being a city, and it will become a ruinous heap. Damascus is one of the oldest, most ancient cities remaining on the planet. This prophecy has never been fulfilled. Damascus has never been destroyed. It has never been a ruinous heap. The city is thousands of years old, but the Bible says it will cease to exist. It will become a heap of ruins. And so we may see this critical Bible prophecy, Isaiah 17, it may come true this year.
My fear is that our support of the rebellion in Syria may accelerate that process. If you're the leader of Syria and you're a dictator, you have no place to go, your ally in Iran is incapable of stopping the overthrow of your nation, what final and more fitting final shot, what parting gift to leave the world than to attack Israel with your chemical stockpile, with your biological stockpile, with your dedicated military troops that would launch a suicide attack on Israel, to sit there and say that this rebellion was caused by the infidels and those who oppose true Islam, and the Jews were behind it, and to attack Israel. Now, assume one chemical weapon were to hit the center of Tel Aviv during a workday. The implications of that are so mind-boggling. It would force Hezbollah into the war. It would force Iran into war. It would force Jordan into war. And it would force Israel to obliterate Damascus. Isaiah 17 will be fulfilled if we stay on the path we're on now, in my opinion.
One of the scenarios that the war planners in Israel are preparing for, and this is a very far-out scenario, but I'm just reporting what Debka file reported several weeks ago, and that is that Iran may detonate a nuclear bomb in the sea to generate a tsunami wave that would take out the city of Tel Aviv.
It is their belief that would work because they've seen the data that we produce. The data we produced in the 50s is an open book for everyone to read and review. I have no idea if that would be sufficient to do that. I don't think they could create a weapon large enough to launch in that capacity. Could they do it on a ship? Yes. They could bring a ship into the Mediterranean, bring it within the coastal areas of Israel, perhaps a suicide attack in a small destroyer or a freighter, and detonate it. And if you were to detonate a 10 or 20 megaton weapon at sea, no one knows what the implications of that would be. We know the fallout would be horrific. We know the death toll would be unimaginable. I really don't know if they could go with that strategy, whereas they also have to look at the proverbial use it or lose it strategy with their own forces. Keep in mind there was a video that came out several months ago from an Israeli amateur filmmaker, and it was posted widely on YouTube. I've got it on my blog somewhere, where it showed a first strike from Iran with nuclear weapons. One of the things that they illustrated were the overwhelming number of planes from Iran, suicide pilots, flying into Israeli airspace. Westerners have a hard time grasping the idea of the kamikaze because we haven't seen it since World War II. But the Islamic radical who believes that they are fulfilling prophecy will sit there and tie the banner around their head and will attack in the name of Allah and die a martyr and be proud of it.
John, what kind of blowback do you expect to be here in the United States when this war starts in the Middle East? I mean, we're talking, there is a real possibility this war may take place in the fall of 2012. I think this is the highest likelihood I have seen in all the years I've been on the radio. This is the year the attack will take place. So there's going to be blowback in Western Europe and in particular in the United States. If you were Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, or if you were Ayatollah Khomeini, and you've sat back and you've watched the U.S. take out Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi and march across the Middle East, and you've watched how the propaganda has been waged and how the airstrikes have been used, you've watched all the scenario, then you would know that the end of the railroad ride is going to be Tehran. So what would you do if you had 5, 7, 8 years to get ready for it? What would you do?
Well, the Iranians have actually been preparing since the 1990s for such a scenario. This was covered, believe it or not, by Geraldo Rivera on an old Fox News program in the summer of 2002, where he was with a coyote who was helping to smuggle Iranians, Libyans, Iraqis, Pakistanis, and other Arabs across the border through Douglas, Arizona. What was shocking to most people was, well, what are we doing about it? Here we are a decade later, and we're doing nothing about it. So we could literally have 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 sleeper cells in this country.
Hey, wait a minute, John.
It's going to take us down.
Let me tell you something, and I'm going to be very careful here that I do not disclose the source. But I had an officer in the American Armed Forces tell me privately, and I had to promise I would never identify him for giving me this information, but he said that 40,000 known terrorists are entering the United States over the border in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. 40,000 known terrorists are coming across the border every month, and it's been going on for years. 40,000 per month.
Actually, not an outrageous figure because they cross back and forth like we have an open door. They're using it to smuggle drugs and weapons into the United States.
But do you know how big this Trojan horse army would be at this point after years of infiltrating us at that level?
I would say in my worst case scenario, we would see north of 2,000 domestic terrorist incidents after the war began across the country, on soft targets, no less. Something I've researched, I've got friends who are in law enforcement who have told me about the scenarios painted to them. Soft targets such as hospitals, senior citizen homes, schools, stadiums, movie theaters, shopping malls, grocery stores, gas stations, interstate highways. The list is endless, he said.
I think the attack will be simultaneous. It'll be on one day.
I agree. I concur entirely. Once the Israelis and Iranians engage, that's the signal. And it won't take much of a signal, but there's one more just horrific signal. Let's assume they have 10 attacks, a great scenario. Only 10 attacks are successful in the United States. Hundreds of terrorists are arrested. They think they've caught themselves. What are we going to do about the attacks on the Arabian oil terminals? What are we going to do about the attacks in Europe on industrial facilities? The most horrific part of this is we might come through this relatively unscathed, except for having a police state, but we could also have our economy broken in half if the Israelis were to launch a suicide attack on the Saudi oil terminals, on the UAE, if they were to take out the banking center in Dubai.
Wait a minute. You said the Saudis. If the Israelis, you mean
I'm talking about the Iranians.
If the Iranians attack the Saudis?
Yes, because if they see that they're going to lose the war, they know they have to take all of their enemies out in one shot. They would take out the Saudis and the Israelis in the same attack. You would lose all oil production. You would lose, oil would be $250, $300 a barrel overnight. It would wipe the United States economy out. It would be far worse than if they were to come here and throw 100 hand grenades into Safeways. You sit there and you take oil to $300 a barrel, the United States economy comes to the guy with the buggy and the horse and the whip becomes the king.
John, how does all this play out? Again, a late fall Israeli attack on Iran. How does this play out in relation to the U.S. presidential election, which looks like it's going to be between Barack Obama, Barry Soetoro, and Mitt Romney?
I fear for our nation because if such an attack were to occur and inside the United States there was either a false flag or successful series of domestic terrorist attacks by Islamic radicals, I think there may not be an election. I tend to fall into the camp where I think a declaration of national emergency and suspension of the Constitution would occur, and I fear that we may not see an election until 2013, possibly 2014.
With Mr. Obama staying in the White House?
Absolutely. Using powers that were created and blessed by the Supreme Court under Lincoln, except expanded under Roosevelt and now codified under the numerous executive orders sitting in the shelf, of which some have never been published for the public to see.
John, if he did something that crazy, that radical, at the same time we have a war and we have terrorist attacks inside the United States and we have financial chaos in the markets, then what Mr. Obama will do is those kind of actions would just split this nation in half. We would be in civil war. There would be blood flowing in the streets of American cities from coast to coast.
Rick, with all due respect, I think that would be the optimistic view. I think that's
the optimistic view? Wow.
I think 70% of the American people would comply and support the president.
Do you really?
In such a scenario, yes. I believe that there's so many people who are scared of losing their financial support, their financial backbone. They are incapable of taking care of themselves. I fear that 70, maybe even a higher percentage, but I'm being conservative, 7 out of 10 people would say, we've got to do what the government tells us to do. This is a time to pull together. Let's just deal with it. And I honestly believe that we would see more of those who objected to the usurpation of the Constitution, the oppression of the Christians, the oppression of religion in this country, those who spoke up. People would want to silence those individuals, round them up, literally, suspend the habeas corpus, put them into re-education centers or prison camps, and prevent the American people from collapsing as a society and creating a new society in the vision of those that we are most worried about and have started the show off discussing. Those who wished a global order, but also wish to get rid of this pesky document called the Constitution. It does open the door for him to do that, and believe it or not, I don't think Mitt Romney would oppose it.
But it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter if Mitt Romney opposed it or not. If Mr. Obama simply seizes power and says, "I'm not leaving the White House." Of course, there's also the other possibility that Mr. Romney wins. That they actually have the election. Mr. Romney wins, and Mr. Obama says, "I'm not leaving," we're in an emergency.
Correct. That's the danger of the Netanyahu attack on the right at the election period. Romney wins. The attack occurs the day after. Well, he's not president. He's only president-elect. And he could suspend the Constitution before the Electoral College has a chance to vote. Imagine that quandary and how the Supreme Court would play that out.
Well, he would simply have the Supreme Court locked up. He wouldn't allow them to meet.
Well, odds are the Supreme Court would support the declaration of emergency and agree to the suspension of constitutional powers until such time that the nation was safe to function normally and under constitutional rule. That's the dangerous part about it. We think that we have people who are quote unquote constitutionalists in that chamber, but in reality, only two of them are hardcore dyed-in-the-wool constitutionalists. The other two are sort of the modern evolution of such, and the rest of them, they're progressives.
That's right. Hey, we've got about 6-7 minutes remaining here. Let's hit two other big topics very quickly. And as I said at the beginning of this program, this program was pre-recorded before I left on Friday for my trip to Maryland. So it's very possible that during the weekend something dramatic happened because the markets in the United States closed until Tuesday morning. But I'm referring to Greece and the European debt crisis. It's obvious now. There's nobody even pretending that Greece is not going to be kicked out of the European Union. And it could very well happen at any time over a weekend so that they can get the markets ready for the opening day. What are going to be the ramifications of this event?
$1 trillion evaporates into thin air.
Why is that?
What will occur is that Greece will essentially default on all of the bonds that are owed and to the debts owed to the banks of the West, be it Europe or the United States. That money would just cease to exist. It will never be repaid. It's similar to the Argentinian and Russian defaults in the current era for those who remember that. I know you remember it because you were on shortwave when the Russian default occurred and spoke to that extensively. What would occur is that we would see bank runs in Ireland, Spain, and Portugal immediately. We would also see some fears in the periphery countries because the Balkans are somewhat unstable now, with Cyprus looking to become a militarized zone with the Israelis and the Turks. You have Bulgaria and Romania teetering as functioning nations now. Hungary, basically a basket case much like Greece. When you start looking at the big picture, you could see the entire Balkan regions go up in flames geopolitically and economically in one short week. On the same token, in the United States, for those who are not prepared for what occurred and actually believe everything you hear on Bubble Vision, the financial networks as I like to call them, you could see your fortunes wiped out before you get out of bed on Tuesday morning. It could be that quick, that fast. A lot of times when I talk about people talk about the Black Swan. It's a book by Nicholas Taleb. This isn't the mother of all black swans, so to speak, but it is one that would cause such extensive damage, it could trigger a series of unforeseen events. One of the biggest concerns are what derivatives Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan Chase, Barclays, Royal Bank of Scotland, et cetera, are holding that would have to be settled as a result of Greece departing the euro. It's also going to make gold extremely expensive. It's going to cause the dollar to skyrocket in value. And I'm afraid you're going to see a declaration of martial law in Greece immediately after that, by the way. They're going to sit there and secure the country because they've seen way too much occur as far as violence, robberies. The conditions there are beyond horrific.
Well, Nigel Farage, a member of the European Parliament, said several weeks ago that he believes they will install a dictator for all of Europe this summer. He believes that all democratic governments will be suspended throughout Europe, and there will be a European dictator.
And that would fit with the training that Angela Merkel, the leader of Germany, the Chancellor of Germany, received as a Communist Party member when she worked in East Germany in her youth and went to school in Moscow. So that would fit her. That's the role I'm sure that she would not mind fulfilling.
All right, now wait a minute, John. This is the second time you've brought this up, and I know we only got like 3 minutes remaining here. Where in the world did you get the information that Angela Merkel, as a young woman, was a commie?
Her father was a pastor in West Germany. After World War II, he decided in the early 1950s that the communist system was superior and took his family across the border into East Germany. She was enrolled into the finest East German schools, graduated with a degree in science. I'll have to pull the article up out of my website. Went on to the university in Moscow for the completion of her political science training, and all of her records have mysteriously been sealed in Moscow since her ascension to political power.
You mean her records are sealed like Barack Obama's records are sealed?
Bingo. Conveniently, the 2 leading Marxists in 2 of the largest capitalist societies in the world have their records sealed in Moscow.
Where are you finding this information? I've never heard this before.
I received a tip from someone in Germany who pointed me to a newspaper article discussing Angela Merkel's past. And it was astonishing, to say the least. And when I started breaking it down, these people have basically allowed, what's the way of phrasing this, the skunk to disguise itself as a cat and become the leader. Der Aufstieg, Angela Merkel's. It was an article on the website Korkstein's back in September of last year. I've got it under the story, The Future of the Capitalist World is Controlled by Two Students of Marx at johngaltfla.com.
All right. So your website again, we're down to the last few seconds.
johngaltfla.com.
John Galt, FLA, as Florida.
.com.
John Galt, GALTFLA, johngaltfla.com.
Correct.
You can read this information about Angela Merkel's communist past in her sealed educational records. It's just like Barack Obama. It's right there in front of us, and we can't comprehend. The public just can't believe that this could really happen, because that stuff only happens in a movie. Well, it's happening in real life. Well, there's our closing music. My guest today, blogger John Galt, that's his pen name, and the website johngaltfla.com. And I want to thank John for spending an hour with me today. I will be back in the studio, God willing, on Wednesday, and we will be back at reporting the headline news, and we have a great lineup of guests for the rest of the week. And as we close, I want to remind our listeners one more time that we sincerely appreciate the financial support for this ministry, True News. We have nothing to sell. We have no gimmicks to raise money. We simply trust God to speak to you and that you will obey. We know He will. We know you will. And all will be fine with us. And God will take care of you also. I'll see you tomorrow.